I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll discuss the kickoff times, which have been announced for about half the season for the Gators so far. So we'll go over some of those times. Another commit at the receiver position for 2022, getting in for the 2022 season here. Napier weighs in on NIL, and the Gators had a busy weekend on the recruiting trail here, hosting a bunch of recruits over this first weekend in June here. First, before we dive in, Will, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. We kind of we took a week off after we finished the magazine. So if you haven't done it yet, go check out the preseason magazine Nick and I put out last week. 156 pages and 53,000 words. It was a lot of writing. So you and I took a week off and sort of pushed that a little bit. Went over on Gators Breakdown and pushed it there too. It's been nice to take a week off, but nice to be back. And certainly. As Dave says, never a dull moment, and so we got stuff going on, even if it's just the beginning of June.
Yeah, for those of you who have gone out and purchased our preseason magazine, we really appreciate the support. Will, you want to remind folks where they can get it if they haven't got a copy yet?
Yeah, you can get it over at readandreaction.com/mag. That's /MAG, and you go over there, you can check it out, and it comes right. It's a digital magazine, so you put in your email address, you pay for it, comes right to your email. You can check it out there. Like I said, 150 plus pages, just about everything we could think of, at least in terms of preseason, the kind of information you'd need in May and June. And then, certainly we'll sort of be working off of that as we move into the fall when we're talking about different things that change, whether there's transfer portal changes or injuries and that sort of stuff as well. So, cool look at the Gators, I think, at least. And, if you haven't done it yet, go check the latest Gators breakdown. You and I are both on there.
Yep.
Sort of Dave was quizzing us on all sorts of stuff, giving me flack about my pick for the playoff. So, it was a good discussion, and certainly, hopefully that's what this does, right? Is the goal is not just to give you information. The goal is to give you stuff to talk about with the people you care about. That's always our goal. That's one of the reasons why we love Gator football is, I'm calling my brother, I'm texting you or, Dave, or we're going back and forth and we're doing that sort of stuff behind the scenes. So this is sort of our attempt to start those conversations, and certainly beats the crap out of politics the next time you're at the dinner table. So you can just talk about the Gators and who's coming up and, what we think versus why we're idiots and all that sort of stuff. And, that's what makes sports great.
And we certainly appreciate our friends over there at Gator Breakdown, David Waters. We also were on Getting Swamped with David Soderquist as well. So made the rounds in Gator Nation here. And you were on 1010 XL up in Jacksonville, Florida with the Hacker, Ryan Hacker, in the evening there. So my hometown radio station there. I was glad to hear you up on that, man. That was a lot. I got a kick out of that. If you missed that interview with Will, you can find that Hacker at Night on SoundCloud, 1010XL. So you can go back and look that up and give the guys up in Jacksonville a little support if you want to hear Will's interview from. It was Friday, was it Friday the 27th, Will?
Yeah, it was the day we released it. He reached out after we announced the release, and it was great, right? I mean, it's awesome to have somebody in Jacksonville right there in the Gators' backyard interviewing you about something like that. And look, the reality is we put a lot of time and effort into it, and so it was awesome to have somebody like that give us a forum to advertise what we're doing. And like I said, I hope we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, so I hope people enjoy it. Certainly, if you have negative feedback, we like hearing that too. Sometimes we don't respond because we're weeping in our bathtub or something after we hear the negative comments. But that's the way it goes. You leave something negative, I guarantee you we read it. We just might, be going out back and flogging ourselves.
I don't know if we like it. We can handle it. We can handle it, right?
I don't even know if we can handle it. I think we just don't respond because, we're sitting there like, wondering, is it worth doing this? But
it's good.
No, we enjoy the constructive criticism. Sometimes we even enjoy the criticism from a Georgia fan or two. And believe me, the minute the Gators are back on top, it'll be going back the other direction. So we get it. That's why it works that way. But look, if there are features you guys want to see, this is the first annual Read and Reaction preview magazine. We're not planning on just stopping now. We're actually planning on adding stuff as we go. And so, we've got sort of the template set up, but that doesn't mean we're not going to add and subtract things over the next year as we prepare for the 2023 season when that comes out. So, go pick it up now, take a look at it. And then, if there are things you want, we'd certainly like to provide that because that's the goal, right? I mean, the goal is to give the fans and the people who are supporting us what they need. And anybody who has been anyone who has been supportive enough to buy it, we want to make sure that we're giving you what you want and giving you what makes it worth your money. So, let us know, and, as kindly as you can. That way, we're not weeping in our bathtubs, but we can handle it even if we are. We'll figure it out.
A lot of weeping in the bath. Will, you had an okay day, man?
No, not really.
Okay, sorry. Kind of feeling some things over here. All right, let's jump into 2-bits, man. We'll get past that bathtub there for you. We'll open up the season under the lights here. It's typical that Florida does open under the lights. You want to stay out of that hot sun there in September. Utah, 7 p.m. kickoff on opening night, September 3rd. Kentucky, 7 p.m. also on ESPN. Both those games are going to be on ESPN. And USF comes to town the following week, third week of the season, on September 17th, 7:30 p.m. on the SEC Network. Will, the Georgia Bulldogs, they've been announced for a 3:30 kickoff in Jacksonville, and Florida State under the lights Friday night after Thanksgiving, 7:30 p.m. So that's 5 of the games that have time so far. You don't always get that this early before the season here, but, kind of expected. I don't think anything's a shock. I do love the night game with Utah, but part of me wanted to play them smack dab in the middle of the afternoon to make those guys from the mountains sweat a little more coming down here into Gainesville. But 7 p.m. it's gonna be humid enough for a bunch of dudes from Utah anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the high in Gainesville's 91 in August, and the low 72 in September. It's 89 and 69. So you're not talking about much of a difference. It's not till October that things really get nice, when you start, 83 during the day, 61 at night. So it's still going to be hot and oppressive even at night there in September. I've been to plenty of September games that have been at night where you're still feeling it. And to be honest, it's never like, yes, the sunshine brings an extra element, but to me, it's always been the humidity that's been the thing. It's just killed me when I've been down there. Like, so I moved from Indiana when I was 16 years old, went out for the first workout for sports, and I was dying, not because it was hot, because it was humid. That's what was killing me. And so I think Utah is still going to feel it. And to be honest, this is throwing a bone to the fans, right? I mean, it is a miserable experience sometimes when you're out there and you tailgate all day and it's hot, and then you go to the stadium and it's hot. And, we had the Alabama game this past year was sort of on the borderline of something that was really, really warm and sort of rough there in the stands, at least for different portions of that game. This is 3 or 4 weeks earlier than that. And so, look, I get why they're doing it. I actually think it's probably more important that they're doing it at night for Kentucky, right? I think, yeah, Utah's in the mountains. Yeah, all that stuff. But it's the first game. You're going to be jazzed to play. That first game, everybody always gets cramps. And so I expect both teams to have cramps that first game there. It's the Kentucky game where you sit there and go, those boys coming from Lexington. Yeah, it's a little bit warm there in the summer in Lexington, but it ain't humid like this. And so, that's the one I'm a little bit surprised they didn't try to get at 3:30 or something like that. But again, they're trying to make the fan experience something good. And when you think about Gainesville, the fan experience for night games is awesome because of the tailgating. It's also awesome because it's a little bit cooler, at least by the time you get there. And, so I understand why they're doing it, but yeah, I have a little bit of it in me where you just sort of want to be vindictive and, put Utah in uncomfortable situations. But based on who their middle linebacker is, I think maybe the counter is a way to do that.
Yeah, nobody likes a noon game. Yeah, a nice shot there with the counter there. Nobody likes a noon game, but I could have lived with maybe a 4 p.m. kickoff for that Utah game, but seven's good. How you feeling about the Friday after Thanksgiving game? I know we discussed it briefly. Your feelings change on that at all?
I mean,
you enjoy that time slot? You think that's going to be a nice addition? I know Strickland seems like it's only going to be a this year thing. I don't think that's going to carry into next year, but how you feeling about it?
I mean, I guess you get it all to yourself, right? So in some ways that's cool. You go out there and put 42 on Florida State and, win 42-3 and everybody sees it. And it is an opportunity to make one last statement to people who are picking bowls and people who are deciding where you might sit and that sort of stuff when it comes to all the different polls and the different things that are going on. I still, look, I mean, it's the SEC. I don't think that you necessarily need to move a game to Friday to get that sort of audience. But obviously, I don't think Florida is the one who decided to do this, right? I mean, I think this is Florida State decided they wanted to be on Friday and decided that they wanted that platform. So, I understand what they're doing. I don't mind having the night to ourselves if it's just once. I think the issue becomes if people try to make this like a permanent tradition. That's probably not something that I would necessarily want, especially because it makes it more difficult for people to get there who are actually spending Thanksgiving with their families. And the students. When I was a student, getting back by Saturday, not a big deal. Getting back by Friday, you're cutting short your vacation and you're cutting short the family time. So, that's all part of it as well.
I guess it depends on who your family is. Well,
it does. It absolutely does.
It's a plus. It could be a plus or a minus there. Hey, for that Friday game though, I really like it right now this year. If you tell me it's a one-shot deal, I think that's great this year because Florida State, with them being down and us last year, I mean, 2 5 and 6 teams competing for bowl eligibility. That's not really moving the needle on any Saturday. On Friday night, that rivalry alone will draw some attention on a national level. So I think that's a good move to put the two programs in the national spotlight in a rivalry that needs a little extra juice right now. So I'm a big fan of the move. I don't see Florida State taking a big jump forward this year. So I do think that's going to be, at least a 4 or 5 loss ball club by the time we go rolling up to Tallahassee there, Will. So I do think that's a good move in this particular year. Now, if the programs get back to where the standards lie and your 2 top 15, top 10 programs going at it, by all means, move it back to Saturday and put it in that primetime kickoff spot.
But I think you put it in. Until then, put it on Saturday, no matter what. This is Florida State needing to sort of bump its profile, and that's fine. If you're going to use the SEC to bump your profile, play them every year. So, beat them like a drum, and it doesn't really matter. I think, we can make a lot out of this, but at the end of the day, it's really a question of, do you get the job done? I don't think there's some huge bump that you get. Now, it's interesting because Bill Sykes wrote a while back at Read and Reaction, or maybe he said it on one of our Gators Breakdown podcasts when he was still on there, that there was something like 10 straight years where the team that won the Florida State game won the recruiting battle the next year. So maybe there is something to that where where when you're talking about in-state recruiting, winning that game is critical. And so, look, doesn't hurt to win that one. Doesn't hurt to win that one big, and doesn't hurt to have the entire state and really the entire country watching. And, if Napier wants to make a statement about where Florida is, depending upon what he's done in the season thus far, you're right. If it's an 8-4 team against a 5-6 team, who cares? Or an 8-3, a 7-5 team against a 6-5 team, who cares? Nobody cares. It's if you've got a 10-2 team or a 10-1 team, I guess at that point, where are you at, right? I mean, do you have the ability to make that into a nationally relevant game? If you do, then having Friday to yourself is great. If it's 2 mediocre teams, then you're sitting there sort of going, all right, well, the only people who are watching it are the people in the state of Florida, because everybody else is hanging out with their family and doing whatever they do on a Friday. So I think a lot of the context in terms of whether we'll like this and how it'll turn out is going to be based on how good the teams actually are.
All right, let's move on here to 4 bits. Another commitment at the wide receiver position for 2022. So a little help from the junior college ranks this time, Independence Community College. I don't know, for those of you who are fans of Last Chance U, that's a school that had Coach JB for the couple seasons out there in Independence, Kansas. But Chiaokhiao-Bowman, Will, out of Minneapolis, Minnesota originally. I believe he has a brother on the Northwestern squad at receiver there too. He was originally a 3-star receiver out of Minneapolis in the class of 2020. He's 6'2", 190 pounds. Also had interest from Ole Miss, Illinois, and Nebraska before landing on the Gators here. Will, again, I'm not sure this is going to be a huge difference maker for this year, but more help at a position that we see as one injury away from being pretty light. So I think that's a good addition here, even if it might not be the make or break for the 2022 season.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, whenever you bring in a junior college guy, you expect him to contribute. You've only got a couple of years of eligibility, and you're not bringing him in there just to sit there for a couple of years behind people, which says a couple of things about what Napier maybe thinks about that wide receiver room, right? Bringing in a guy who's going to count back to that 2022 class. The other thing that's interesting is the NCAA did pass some legislation recently that really did away with initial counters for the next 2 years. And the only thing that's going to matter is scholarships. And so there's the roster management aspect of things with all the transfers has always, with the transfer portal and all the different things that are going on with NIL has been a challenge. And I'm not sure that it's going to be as big a challenge now that the initial counters have been done away with for the next 2 years. So it used to be that you got 25 per year or 100 over a 4-year cycle, and you could move some back and forth, but you'd sign those 100 players and only 85 of them would get scholarships. So obviously you've got some attrition, but that meant you couldn't just offer 3,000 people and take people. And it basically limited what you could do in terms of the number of commits you have. And, if you ever heard the old term gray shirt for Nick Saban, he would have people commit and then he wouldn't give them a scholarship. And so they put these initial counter rules in place to sort of prevent that type of thing. But what happened is with the transfer portal, guys were getting stuck in the portal, not because they couldn't find a home, but because there wasn't the counter available for different programs. So the NCAA has gotten rid of that. What that means is you can take a shot on a junior college guy, bring him in. It doesn't cost you the high school recruit who's coming behind you. All it does is allow you to have him compete with someone on the roster already. And when one of those guys decides to transfer afterwards, then okay, you've got that one scholarship for those two people that you put in there. So this in many ways is taking advantage of that they don't have that limitation. And so you can do some more short-term roster building now that has nothing to do with the long-term health of your program. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Billy Napier decides to do that, and really how every program decides to do that based on the rules and the way they're set for the next 2 years. It really does sort of set up for short-term roster building while maintaining your long-term plan for the next 2 years. Now, if they just kind of roll this over and never have initial counters come back, then you run into the same problem where you get kids who come to school but don't actually get scholarships because you oversign and those sorts of things. So those are the types of things I think that the NCAA and the conferences are going to be managing. But as of right now, bringing in a guy like Bowman doesn't really punish you based on the rules if he doesn't work out. So it's all upside, right? If he turns into a starter, or if he turns into a valuable backup, that's great. And in 2 years, when your big time recruits hopefully are coming through, he's moved on either to the NFL or whatever his next career path is going to be. And it hasn't cost you the roster building on the backside that it might have 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Chiaokhiao-Bowman cited his relationship with Kiri Colbert as a big reason for the commitment. We're going to get into the recruiting section at the end, but what have you heard about Kiri Colbert behind the scenes? It's a wide receiver coach.
I mean, I think everybody is really respectful of what he did at USC as a receiver. I think they've been very impressed with the players that he's put into the NFL, right? I mean, the list of guys who are coming into Gainesville and considering Florida is pretty significant. That's sort of the story the whole way across the board, though. And, you think about guys like Corey Raymond and just Billy Napier in general and Patrick Toney, and all these guys are known as pretty good recruiters. The question then becomes, can you convert them and can you get them into the league? And Colbert has been able to do that. So I think that's sort of what you're hearing when you think about what people are saying about Colbert. Again, is that going to translate into the big time recruits? I don't know. It did at USC. I mean, it's not like USC has been hurting on the recruiting front over the last 5 or 10 years under Helton. They just hadn't been able to convert that into wins. And, the expectation is that now Lincoln Riley's there. He's going to start converting those into wins, but that's going to be with guys that Colbert brought in, right? Or at least Colbert was one of the primary recruiters for.
The funny part is they were hurting on the recruiting front, but the receivers position was doing real well. They had, Pittman come through there, and last year Drake London. So even with USC being quote unquote down, they've the receivers have been strong. So it's been interesting. You like to see a new receiver. That was an interesting hire. Obviously, Colbert has those connections back to the Alabama days with Billy Napier. So it's interesting to see some of these guys comment on the different position coaches as they come in here. Well, let's move.
So hold on. USC was 7th in 2021, and they were a little bit worse in 2020. So
they had one, like Helton was struggling, and he had 1 year where he had kind of a shot in the arm, and then that was about it. It looked like a last gasp effort, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, well, regardless, Colbert's been putting guys in the NFL pretty consistently. Yeah. So that
first round pick this year.
Well, I can't remember his name, but the guy for the Lions last year.
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, so he's a USC guy. Came through, had Colbert as coach, and you think about that. I mean, if you're a Pro Bowl level player for the Lions, You're a pretty talented dude.
Right, 4th round pick, too. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Yeah. Colburn said has a good track record already in his young career. So love hearing recruits call out the assistants as they come in too. Shows the type of staff Napier's put together here. Let's move on to 6 bits. Will, we have had our fun with Saban and Jimbo. We did not get the fist fight we wanted at the SEC spring meetings. Wasn't very interesting at all, actually. And I think they even tried to get Saban going. I don't know if you saw the follow-up comment when he said that I didn't mean to call anybody out specifically by name. I didn't say anybody did anything wrong. And reporter jumped in and was like, "You said Texas A&M paid for their players." And he goes, "I didn't say anybody did anything wrong."
He's like, "Yeah, so."
He just kind of stood by it and just didn't really react. So you didn't get that big reaction that you're hoping for. Napier was asked about the NIL mess along these lines, though, with the whole Jimbo and Saban thing blowing up. And he echoed as much as Jimbo and Saban went after each other, they both ended up saying the same thing, where it's like, you want to criticize us, but there's no real guidelines to have one set of rules right now. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing and operating the way they want. And until we have that one set of rules, you can't really kill us for this. I tend to agree with that. Billy Napier came out and had a couple interesting comments, though. There was a lot of articles where the headline was Napier says the Gators are not going to get into NIL bidding wars. And I feel like people took that a certain way. There was a certain perception around that comment. I want to dive into that, Will. Napier said, "I think the NIL is a portion of the decision with recruits' decisions for college. I think a lot of times when you really dig into why the player is leaving where he's at, there are other factors. All these situations are case by case. You've got to evaluate each situation independent of all the others. There's no manual for this in college football right now. I've been studying the NFL because I feel like there are some things to learn. Every player on our team who hasn't transferred before is a free agent every single year. That's the one thing we lack that the NFL has. As every day goes by and the more that we are boots on the ground as we get out, we get to know people. NIL is going to be a slam dunk for the Florida Gators," Napier said. So he's, on the one hand, he's confident in what NIL is going to provide. On the other hand, this is very consistent with Billy Napier. Everything that was just said. I got to get used to reading some of the Billy Napier quotes in his language there, Will. I sometimes sound like I'm straying because I'm just like, if I heard Billy Napier say all that, that makes perfect sense. But when you read it, you got to read it in Napier's voice almost for it to make sense sometimes. But Napier is sitting there saying, "Hey, we're going to take an approach situation by situation here. We're not going to let this thing get out of control. We are going to make it an advantage for the Gators, but we're not going to go too overboard with this to where it's going to be a thing that gets wild and out of control for us," basically is what I heard from that statement. I did not hear that the Gators aren't going to be involved for some of the top guys out there. That's not how I perceive that statement. I just heard he's not going to let it get too out of control, and that there's going to be, if you're comparing it to the NFL, especially, basically a value assigned to the players, and they're going to stick to their value. Basically, they're not going to go overboard on value for players.
Well, I mean, look, I think everybody's going to do that, right? I mean, there is now a monetary component associated with roster building that at least was not public before. Now, I think anybody who has followed college football for years, I mean, one interesting thing was after the Jimbo and Saban thing blew up, Bud Elliott was on Twitter talking about how the reason the SEC had become dominant is they got a conference commissioner who told them to stop narking on each other. And all of a sudden now, hey, everybody's winning. Like, lo and behold, all the best players are staying here because nobody's on probation every 4 years. And in some ways that's true, right? Like, we have known for years, and college basketball is even worse for this, right? We know that there's money coming from agents and there's money coming from, various nefarious sources, and quite honestly, probably money coming from coaches and programs and boosters that's associated with this. I mean, Blue Chips came out how many years ago? And then you think about Will Wade and what was going on there at LSU allegedly, and then the wiretaps in college basketball and the stuff that was going on at LSU with the hospital and all those sorts of things. Look, this is not a sport that's as white as the fresh snow, right? Like, we have known that. So the idea that money is now above board just means that now everybody can see it and everybody can decide how they want to participate and how they don't want to participate. And so I look at it and I say, look, Napier needs to take a strategic approach to how he allocates funds. I mean, we've talked about that multiple times. The one thing I will say, and look, there are plenty of guys who go out there. Like, you think about the NBA, where you spend a max, you assign a max contract to a guy who's really not one of the top 5 or 10 people in the NBA. Well, now you're stuck, right? Because you capped yourself out. That may happen to some teams. I mean, we talked about the $8 million deal with that was publicized in The Athletic, and the program that gives that out, allegedly Tennessee, the program that gives it out may be strapped when it comes to recruits a year from now or 2 years from now. So there has to be strategy to it. At the same time, I mean, if we're talking millions of dollars, I don't care how good your facilities are. Like, I'm not a kid who coming out of high school would have been like hurting for money. Like, my parents had make a nice living. Like, it wouldn't have been an issue. Like, I could have gone wherever I wanted to go. But you're not pulling me there with facilities if somebody can lay a couple $1 million down in front of me.
Right.
And that's just the reality. And so in some ways, he is in a bidding war, especially when it comes to the top 15, top 30 players. Now, you got to decide which ones you want to bid on. And you got to decide your evaluations and how strong those are and what positions you need and those sorts of things. But let's be honest, for a couple $1 million, like, a kid would be an idiot to go, well, I'm going to go to the place they have the best eating arrangements or the best dorms. And certainly those things are part of it. But if I got a couple $1 million, I'm going to say, hey, coach, I'd like to live in an off-campus apartment that looks like a mausoleum because I'm making millions of dollars while I'm playing here. And well, you're going to have to live on campus. Sorry, I'm going someplace. Well, okay, we'll let you be an exception. So I don't know. I understand that it's part of the decision. But it's just like if somebody called me tomorrow, like if a headhunter calls me, I like what I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm not planning on quitting. But if a headhunter calls me and offers me 3 times the salary that I make right now, I'm out. And I mean, it almost doesn't matter where the job is.
To that point, Will, and tying this back to Jimbo and Saban, it's not to say that Jimbo and his staff don't do a hell of a job recruiting, because they were top 5 before all the NIL stuff. They were working their way up in the ranks anyway. But to land the type of class they just landed, did they not overpay for some? Do you believe in your heart of hearts that they didn't overpay to make those guys who would normally be going to Alabama probably all of a sudden say they want to go to Texas A&M? You don't think there was some overpaying going on there?
Well, I don't know. So they signed what, 7 5-stars? 8 5-stars. If 6 of those guys are NFL draft picks, did they overpay?
Well, I guess it depends.
I mean, because
what type of draft picks we're talking about.
Kind of does, but those guys tend to be top 3 draft picks. So
but what I'm saying though is do you think to get them? You don't know that answer yet. To get them in the door, do you feel like they probably? Statistically, some of those guys are going to bust out, right? It's probably not going to be a 6 out of 75% hit rate.
I don't know. Top 15 guys are right in that range.
All right. Well, we'll see. We shall see. But they have the money now. They don't have to work for the money like they used to either, Will. So you got to keep that in mind. So some of these guys might be like first-round NFL picks and get fat and happy now. You never know. We got that factor going still.
Well, two things. One, you have no idea how much money they were making behind the scenes. It's just now that it's public. So maybe it was a significant amount of money to begin with, right? 2, you don't become a top 15 player in the country without either having unworldly talent or a really strong work ethic, or both. Yeah. And so you're going to still be able to dominate. Like, the reason the top 15 guys make it to the NFL is not because, there's some magical crystal ball that people look at and go, these 15 guys are going to make it. It's because they jump off the film and they jump off the field when you look at them. And so, when you're trying to parse between the guy who's ranked 250 and the guys ranked 275, these guys are pretty close. And hey, on the right day, a guy might look like he's ranked 150th. And on the wrong day, he might look like he's a guy who's ranked in the thousands, right? The guy who's top 15 always looks like he's in that top 30, right? Even on a bad day, you're sitting there going, okay, I see him jumping off the screen or off the field or wherever you are scouting him. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think they miss quarterbacks more often in the 5-star range too, is because you see the arm strength jump off the page, but you don't necessarily see the accuracy, or you can't evaluate that with one look. One thing I do want to go back to, Bud Davis did a really nice job. This was maybe a month ago on Twitter. He was looking at essentially the size of the war chest and how much of that money is freed up right now. Because look, the universities don't get to pay these guys. The programs don't get to pay these guys. These are name, image, and likeness deals that are paid for by entities other than the university, that are not actually tied to the player playing for the university, but wink, wink, are sort of tied to the player playing for the university, right? And so the NIL deals, the thing that Bud put together indicated that A&M had way more free cash essentially than anybody else, that the booster money that was coming in was going to be easy to reallocate to NIL deals, as opposed to things like, he basically indicated that there were entities, Alabama was one of them, that had a bunch of endowments. And those endowments were going to be very difficult to separate from the university into an NIL deal. So the location and the strategy of actually getting the money out of the university, for years, these places have been built trying to bring money into the university so that they could spend it on, support staff and nutrition and coaches and dorms and facilities and all that sort of stuff. And overnight that shifted now to where you need that cash essentially to not be tied to the university. And I think the idea of did you overpay is going to be tied to what your overall cash position is. And the reason A&M was able to put together that class, in the overall market scheme of things, maybe they overpaid. But did they have, this is like if you got $1 million, or let's say you got $100 million and you want to go buy a brand new $100,000 car, that $100,000 car really isn't all that much. If you have $200,000 total and you want to buy a $100,000 car, well, now that $100,000 car is really expensive, right? So you may overpay for your vehicle if you're spending $100,000 on that $100,000 car. The car may be worth $100,000, but you've overpaid for it based on your cash position. If you have $100 million, you want to buy a $100,000 car, who cares, right? I mean, at that point, it's like Elon Musk buying Twitter. Like it's $40 billion. That's nothing. That's like, 20% of my net worth. Who cares? And, so those sort of ratios start to make a difference. And that's one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting to see, is how easily and how quickly can the universities mobilize to get, and can the programs mobilize to get the money out of the program when they've been building everything for years and years and years to bring it in.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the right balance is, because I think that's where Napier is hinting at, is the level of balance they're looking to achieve. You look at his situations. I think of the commitments this past year. There's a 5-star kid, wide receiver out of the St. Louis area, I believe. I'm blanking on his name, but he committed to Missouri, receiver. I think Mizzou will pay whatever it takes to keep a kid like that. Like, Missouri's not getting a ton of 5-star talent, right? So 5-star kid out of Atlanta, Georgia, Alabama, a bunch of schools are going to be lined up. Missouri's not going to go after that 5-star kid from Atlanta, but from their own backyard, I think they will way overpay for a kid like that. There's that big offensive lineman out of Massachusetts this year, for example. Will, don't you think Boston College would throw a little extra at the kid to make sure he stays at home? Whereas in the past, maybe that kid's definitely getting out of their backyard to go somewhere else. So I think those are the challenges you're going to face in terms of the overpay. Is not just going to be the usual suspects of Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, et cetera, that you're going to be facing. It's going to be that one-off kid, pulling them from a different geographic area, where maybe a school like Missouri is going to be like, no, we'll pay you more than whoever comes in to offer you. So I think some of those schools will go crazy in paying individual players that might entice them to stay in an area which otherwise in the past they might have left. But I think Napier's talking about, we're going to stick to our principles one way or another. And if you're all about the NIL, then maybe you're not the right fit here at Florida.
I'm fine with him sticking to his principles so long as he brings me a top 5 class. The minute there's not a top 5 class, the principles can go out the window. Like, at the end of the day, the principle, and here's the deal. Like I said earlier, we have known that there's cheating going on in college sports for years and years and years. People like to talk about there being a clean program, but no program that's won big time has been completely clean. Now, maybe the coaches and maybe the administration weren't necessarily involved in it, but the programs weren't clean. I don't think anybody thinks that. So the reality is that this has always been a part of college football. We know what it takes to win. You came here saying it's a talent acquisition business. Well, this is now part of talent acquisition. And, you're not going to get 6 years at Florida to figure out the right balance of how you're going to administer NIL. Right. And I got to be honest, if Florida makes it to the SEC championship game and gets waxed by Texas A&M, like, I think we can, like, the Georgia winning is understandable because we see what Kirby's doing and it stinks because it's Georgia, but we look at it and go, okay, that program has been built and that program recruits at the highest level. Alabama, okay, that's one of the greatest coaches to ever coach, if not the greatest coach to ever coach in college football. All right, losing the SEC championship game to him, that's fine. Losing to a guy who bailed on Florida State and beat Florida pretty consistently when he was at Florida State, and now goes to Texas A&M and wins the NIL deal for a program that wasn't even in the SEC, a decade ago. That's kind of tough to swallow. And so, I think some of it is going to be, you're going to have to win the SEC. And how do you get there? Well, you get there. You've said it yourself. It's a talent acquisition business. Again, he's got a year, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the 2023 class, we kind of know what it needs to be in order to push this program forward. He's got a year to figure out how to allocate that. If he allocates the funds correctly, that's fine.
Right.
Maybe you give him a grace period just because NIL is new, but that means the 2024 class has to be like number one, right? There's not time to sit
there's
there.
There's going to be that question. Do you allocate? Do you go all in on those top level guys and then you have less to allocate toward, maybe spots 9 through 25 in your class? Or do you spread it out a little more? I think different schools will have different approaches on that, but I think that's going to be what's felt out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe, but it's obvious who ends up in the pros. It's obvious who ends up being the real difference makers in college football. And look, I love it when a 3-star does great and overperforms. And quite honestly, I think there are reasons for that. And I think some of it is evaluation and some of it is determination, all those sorts of things. I think we should laud those guys and appreciate what they're doing in order to move things forward and in order to move their careers forward. A 3-star who makes the NFL is a statistical anomaly, and that means that person has done something great. A 5-star who makes it to the NFL just did what we should expect from him. Mm-hmm. And so, in that capacity, I get it. When the 3-star pans out, that's awesome. And you think about like the example I usually give is the Golden State Warriors. Like the Warriors with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, those guys were 1st-round draft picks. Draymond Green was a 2nd-round draft pick, but is integral to what they do. Hitting on that 2nd-round draft pick was key to them being able to win the titles and now being back in the NBA Finals. You need those 2nd-round picks to make your thing go. But Draymond Green on the court with a bunch of stiffs isn't going to do you any good, right? Draymond Green is good because he's with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Like he's able to use his skills in a way because he has those stars surrounding him. And so that to me is the story of stars in football as well, right? Like let's say you hit on a Baker Mayfield, who's a 3-star quarterback. If you got 3 5-star wide receivers out there around him, Baker Mayfield, 1, looks better. And 2, the fact that Baker Mayfield is as skilled as he is and the analysts missed on him means that he can take advantage of the fact that he has all that talent around him. If you put Baker Mayfield on Purdue, he's not winning anything. Like the fact that he was in Oklahoma is one of the reasons why he was good. And, the idea that he got overlooked at Texas Tech, well, some of that might be that there were guys at Texas Tech who weren't able to take advantage of some of the skills that Mayfield had, and obviously Kingsbury has been an interesting fit there at Arizona. But, look, I think the jury is out. I don't like hearing that, I know it's just coach speak, right? Look, the university has all this stuff to offer. We got the education, we got the facilities. Parking is great, meals are great, all that sort of stuff. A couple $1 million, nobody cares. So the place where that should make a decision, where those things should really start to play into the decision-making process, is the guys who are ranked, between 200 and 800. Because there you're talking about evaluations. There you're talking about value. There you're talking about, hey, should I spend money or should I ask the NIL organizations to spend money on guys who are ranked 400th to 800th, or should I splurge maybe on guys who are ranked in the 150 to 300 range? I don't know that there's a ton of value in just eschewing the bidding wars in the top 15, top 30 guys. Now, I think you can make reasonable analyses for guys in, say, that 40, 50, 60, 70 range. The speed with which the number of guys who go to the NFL, the speed with which that drops off is really rapid. And it's usually right like the top 15 make it to the NFL at a much higher percentage than 15 to 30, and 30 to 45 at a much lower percentage than 15 to 30. And once you get past that, it kind of levels off. And so I do think that there's a resource allocation strategy here. I just think the idea that, so where you get in the bidding war, I guess, is the thing that I'm saying is important, right? That you need to allocate resources on the top end and then probably figure out, or you need to spend resources on the top end or whatever it takes. And then you need to allocate resources on the back end. But yeah, it's an efficiency problem. It's always going to be an efficiency problem, but it's like baseball, right? The Dodgers in Oakland. Right. I mean, the Dodgers are spending like $350 million this year for that team. Oakland, I think, is spending 30. Now, in some ways, that's reflected in their records, right? I mean, the Dodgers are a lot better team than Oakland right now, but it's also based on the realities. So in college football, there are going to be some teams who are the Oakland A's. There are going to be some teams who are the Los Angeles Dodgers. Florida should be far closer to the Dodgers than they should be to Oakland. I think that's kind of what Napier's saying when he's saying this will be an advantage for Florida. The problem is that the SEC is a division of the Los Angeles Dodgers, right? It's the American League East where you got the Yankees and the Red Sox
Brian
and the
Kelly
Orioles all spending money. Yeah. Well, that is what it is. I mean, it's you're going to have to compete with those guys, which means you're not bidding against Clemson. You're not bidding against Rutgers. You're not bidding against Michigan. You're bidding against Alabama and Georgia and Texas A&M and LSU and Auburn and all those guys who have crazy football fan bases who are willing to support these things. Again, I think this is an execution question more than it is an allocation question in some ways, because it's how do you execute moving the money to those NIL channels so that, you're the guy with $100 million buying the $100,000 car, rather than the guy with a really nice house who has no cash on hand to make a purchase because you got this mortgage that's huge and you can't afford to buy anything else. And that's the analogy I'd use for teams that have or for programs that have a bunch of money in endowments is, you've essentially bought your mortgage, right? The endowment is sitting there. The money is sitting there. How do you get it out? That'll be one of the questions, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence that Nick Saban is so upset about this, in that this is the first time, like there have been times where he has had a similar, I guess, where he hasn't had any advantage. Like if you think about him and Kirby over the last few years, like Kirby essentially has taken Saban's process and applied it to Georgia. And in some ways, Athens is maybe a better location to recruit than Tuscaloosa. They're probably pretty close, right? So they're sitting there basically equivalent. And I think the thing that got him mad about A&M is that A&M now has an advantage. And Saban doesn't like it when people have advantages. And Saban's willing to say he doesn't like it when people have advantages. And so he's willing to sit there and go, I don't think it's a good thing for these players to be getting paid and, all that sort of stuff while he's making $10 million a year. And you're just sitting there going, come on, you're such a hypocrite. And he's like, I don't care. I'm getting beat. I don't like it.
Yeah, he's really about the worst voice for most of these issues. All right. Well, look, we could go down this rabbit hole for quite a while. As you can see, it's super interesting though to see how this pans out. One, because we haven't seen Napier put together a class at Florida yet. We're still in the middle. Well, I guess we saw him wrap an entire cycle, right? The 2023 is his first full cycle. So we got to see how this pans out this class. And then we'll have some ideas about the resource allocation after we see this 2023 class come together. But until then, it's all speculation. But let's move into a dollar here. First weekend of June. A lot of positive comments from a bunch of visitors. There were 8 official visits, only 1 commit. Bryce Lovett. We talked about the big tackle out of Rockledge a few weeks ago, so we won't go into that. But we'll go one by one here and get some feedback on each here. First, let's talk about running back Trayon Webb out of the Jacksonville area here. He tweeted on Sunday evening, I am no longer taking an official to Tennessee. I have committed to a school twice already. So forgive me if I want to be 100% sure before I commit to a school. I want to be all in. The fans and the school that I choose deserves that. This tweet coming on the heels of a visit over the weekend, Will, I think that sounds very positive for Florida and Billy Napier.
I mean, I don't know. We're talking about a dude who wore Florida stuff his entire youth, whose dad played for Florida. If this is one you can't secure, we're going to have issues, right? Especially when you consider where Florida is from a running back perspective in the recruiting room. And then also the fact that Napier is a guy who's going to have running backs who certainly get the rock, right? And so this is one where I think we sort of look at and say, this has always been Florida's to lose. But again, it's Jacksonville. It's a legacy. It's a guy who's ranked in the top 150. Those are guys that you have to lock up. That circle around Gainesville, you got to lock up. So it's a great sign that after the official visit, he's not taking visits elsewhere. At the same time, just announce it. Like, tell us you're going here.
Well, I didn't realize he had committed twice previously to Oklahoma and Georgia. So those are the two schools he's referencing there.
Yeah, well,
so I can see maybe he just wants to take a little time, but we've also seen these guys commit behind the scenes and then announce it a week or two later. We've seen that a few times from this staff.
Okay, so in 2 weeks we'll hear from him. That's awesome. Let's do it.
Let me know when he says it.
Yeah.
Wide receiver Aiden Mizell. He tweeted that he had an amazing time here in Gainesville. Orlando Boone wide receiver. In May, he released his top 7, Florida, alongside Georgia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, USC, and Central in Orlando there. That Orlando local school there, Will. Another type of prospect you're talking about. Draw that circle around Gainesville and get this type of guy all day. A lot of positive momentum here, it seems like, Will. But again, no commit.
Yeah, so Mizell's been a Florida lean for a pretty long time, right? I mean, he's something that we've been hearing that's where he's going. He's a track athlete, and we talked a little bit last week about Pearsall and whether he could be a guy who could take the top off the defense, and probably not. And so you're going to have to get that from Marcus Burke. And are you going to be able to get that from Marcus Burke? Well, here's a guy whose mother was an All-American sprinter at UF. And, now he's doing track as well as playing wide receiver. You think about what Florida needs at that position, a guy on the outside who's a burner that fits it. Mizell ranked 115th overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite from Orlando. Again, that circle in Florida. You can't lose these types of guys, right? You need skill position players. You think about the Alabama dynasty over the last decade and how many of those wide receivers have come from the state of Florida, and look, these are the guys you got to bring in. And is Mizell going to be a star? I have no idea. But you need a bunch of guys like that, because 2 or 3 of them pan out, and all of a sudden, you're back to where you were when you had guys like Jacquez Green and Riedel Anthony and Rashae Caldwell and Jabbar Gaffney and those sorts of guys on the sidelines in Gainesville, where we name off the wide receivers. And I think over the last 5 or 10 years, other than Kadarius Toney, who do you name off as guys that people outside of Florida would know? Maybe Van Jefferson. But Tony's the only one and Pitts, obviously, but he wasn't a wide receiver. You look; those are sort of the two that get named off, and then it's guys who were good and solid, but nobody who was a star. I think Mizell has an opportunity to be a star, if not necessarily right away on the outside, certainly on special teams. Right, that kind of speed is something we haven't necessarily seen on special teams for a long time. So I expect him to commit to Florida, and I think we'll be happy when he does.
Another visitor, defensive lineman Kelby Collins, 6'5", 280 pounds, from Gardendale, Alabama, which is about an hour away from Tuscaloosa. He's got Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida in his top 5.
Yeah, man, 64th ranked overall player, defensive lineman. We've talked extensively about what Florida's defensive line looks like. This is one of those guys, though, we talked a little bit. The 24/7 Sports actually has him ranked 153rd, and the 24/7 Sports Composite has him at 64th. So this is one of those guys who's probably a little bit boom or bust, just in terms of the overall quality. There are some recruiting sites who think he's a 5-star candidate, right? You don't get to 64th when someone has you 153rd without somebody thinking you're up there in that 20 to 30 range. So he's a guy who conceivably has 5-star talent, but there are reasons why people have him ranked lower as well. And so, that'll be the question, right? Is he more of that 30th or 20th ranked guy, or is he more that 150th or even 200th ranked guy? And that's sort of what we'll have to find out as the senior year plays out.
Linebacker Raul Aguirre out of Fayetteville, Georgia. This is from Blake Alderman, 24/7 Sports. Aguirre told him, I'm going to go ahead and say this will set everything apart. I didn't have Florida in my top 5 before my visit, and now I've moved them up. if not the top 3, the top 4. It was just a great visit all around. So Aguirre comes away from his visit to Gainesville seemingly very impressed if they weren't even in his top 5, and now they're definitely up there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about Peterson there at the linebacker coach and what he's sort of done and put together there. I think everybody respects him, certainly respects what he did in the league. And so you think about a linebacker who's coming to Florida who says, look, I'm going to be coached by a guy who was a big-time player in the NFL, a big-time player in college football, and can tell me what it's like to be the big man on campus here. One of the things I will say, look, I am reserving judgment because we haven't seen these guys commit, but every single guy on this list is Alabama, Florida, Ohio State, Auburn, Oklahoma is on the list of commits or the list of offers. And that's what you see here with Aguirre too. So, Florida isn't going to hit on every one of these guys. I don't expect them to hit on every single one of these guys, but the fact that their commit list has guys who Alabama wants means that, Napier may not be necessarily getting into a bidding war, but in some capacity he may have to at some point, because that's who else is going for these guys.
Grayson Pup Howard out of Jacksonville, Jackson High there in Duval County, 6'3", 223. Will, this frame, you talk about a college ready frame, but we've lacked these big linebackers here in Gainesville. This guy's going to be a beast. Crystal ball for South Carolina right now, but it seems to have a good rapport with the Florida coaches. I know they've been up there a couple times up in Jacksonville, and it's good to see Grayson Howard get on campus in Gainesville this weekend.
Yeah, you can't let guys from Jacksonville go to Columbia. I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, it's a drive for family. You're right down the road if you're in Jacksonville. The only question there is, does he want to get away from home? I guess is maybe one. Sometimes kids just want to go someplace else. But look, I mean, the circle is real. You have to win the Florida recruiting battle. And again, you look at the list: Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Clemson, Texas A&M. It's a who's who of other programs that are on Howard's interest list. And so, Jacksonville should tilt it in Florida's favor, right? I mean, you look at that, and, even Athens is further away than Gainesville. And so, these are the types of guys you got to bring in. These are the types of guys who bring depth to your program. And these are the types of guys we were just talking about in terms of asset allocation, making sure that you've done what you need to do to make sure these guys are Gators.
The last official visit, or a couple more actually. Jordan Hall, you got linebacker Jordan Hall out of IMG Academy. Of course, we finally have broken in down there at IMG. Says, this is the first time coming here with my family, so I wanted to give them the opportunity to see some things that I've been seeing and meet some of the people I've met. Good opportunity to get on campus here, Will, for Jordan Hall from IMG. Says it's a positive as well, that there's other guys from IMG up there, so he's got guys to relate to on campus already. Will, again, this is the 3 linebackers here, so linebacker heavy. Saw a lot of Bateman this weekend, a lot of mentioning of Bateman and Mike Peterson this weekend. Definitely a position we need to upgrade anyway. So I like to see there's a heavy focus on linebackers in this class.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's no secret the last 2 years Florida's defense has been pretty porous. And so, the fact that there's an emphasis on that side of the ball, the fact that there's going to be real focus put on bringing in multiple guys at each of these positions. It's not a coincidence they got a bunch of 5-star cornerbacks who they're going after. And you think about what they're doing at the linebacker position, it's a very similar thing, right? Bringing in elite guys and saying, look, we're going to have 3, 4, 5 guys come in. The guys who connect the most with Peterson, the guys who connect the most with Bateman, the guys who connect the most with Tony, those are the guys that we're going to make sure that we prioritize and bring in, and the guys who want to help build something, right? So again, you look at the list for Hall: Florida, Michigan, Michigan State, North Carolina, Notre Dame. Those are big time teams. And so maybe not Michigan State, but those are big time teams.
Hey, they're paying big time money to Mel Tucker. They would disagree with that statement up there.
Well, they don't have anything left for NIL then if they're paying all that money to Tucker. So,
No respect for Sparty on this podcast. All right.
No.
Let's go on final official visitor here, Jordan Castile, safety. By the way, that quote was from Brandon Carroll, SI Gators, from that Jordan Hall quote, by the way. Didn't mean to not cite that there. Brandon Carroll, SIL Gators. Go check them out. Jordan Castile, he's got Florida at the top of his list. Will says Tennessee, Auburn, and Michigan are also on that list, but it seems like Florida is comfortably in control for the safety, who says I read somewhere that they were saying that the coaches like his versatility, can kind of play anywhere in the defensive backfield.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's one of the things that as RPOs get more and more prevalent, you start thinking about read option, all that sort of thing. You need guys who are going to be able to move around. You need guys who are versatile. You look at what Nick Saban's done on defense in terms of getting guys, sort of in response to Johnny Manziel and the different things that, that he's been able to that he showed Saban needed to change. And it's funny, you look at the evolution of Saban. First, he sort of changed on defense, and then he realized how hard it was to guard those guys and started bringing in some of those guys on offense and implementing some of those strategies. And, look, getting guys that are those sorts of tweeners who can cover, but also can come up and tackle. That's important stuff. And again, I think you look at who Florida's going to bring in. I think you're going to be looking at speed, athleticism, but also a toughness. And, you think about like those Miami Hurricane teams and even the Urban Meyer teams, they were tough teams, but, they talked about being a track team, speed, SEC speed. Things have changed a little bit, right? It's you need guys who are multiple. You need guys, finding guys who can be 3 down defenders. So you don't have to constantly bring people in and out, so that if the defense or if the offense decides that it wants to put a running back in motion and get him on a linebacker, do you have somebody who can guard him? Do you have a guy who can play as a linebacker, but also be in coverage if you run into those sorts of situations? Those are the things that guys like this hopefully are able to provide.
A couple of unofficial visits as well. Caden McDonald out of Swanee, Georgia, 6'3", 310, big fella at North Gwinnett High School. Georgia lean right now is being crystal ball toward Georgia, but he was on campus this weekend. Will, just looks like big, typical SEC lineman here, 4-star kid. Looks like it would be a good steal if we can lure him away from Kirby Smart.
Hey, anytime you steal somebody from Kirby, go for it, especially at that position, right? He's 6'3", 310. That's the kind of beef that Florida needs up front, right? We all offseason, the thing we've said is, wow, who's going to help Dexter on the defensive line? Who's going to help Dexter on the defensive line? You're sitting there going, can Chris McClellan help on the defensive line? It's always a bad thing when you're looking at a true freshman saying, hey, could he be the missing piece on the defensive line in the SEC as a true freshman? It's like, he might be a really good player, but to ask him to like slot in next to a guy like Dexter and be the key piece is a really difficult thing to ask of a true freshman. So building up depth, building up just a pipeline of players, McDonald could certainly be a part of that.
Don't worry, big Desmond Watson's got it. He's got it. He'll cover us for that, right? And last but not least here, unofficial visits, defensive lineman to Marion Parker out of Phoenix City, Alabama at Central High School there, 6'4", 255. Georgia lean right now, crystal ball, 4-star kid. More help along that defensive front, Will. Again, you're talking about a kid that's in the mix with Georgia, Michigan State, Penn State, Alabama, Ohio State, Florida. So you're in the mix with the right schools here. Good to get. What's the advantage of getting them on campus for unofficial versus official, Will?
Well, I mean, I think the official, obviously, the red carpets get rolled out and expenses are paid, right? The unofficial means the kid's actually serious because he's the one who has to pay those expenses, right? Now, whether or not that's as important in this era, do you get reimbursed for your expenses through NIL later on when you commit? I have no idea, but that's really the difference is if you take an unofficial visit, you probably are pretty serious about it because you have to pay for that sort of thing out of pocket. I don't know that it means that anything is any less professional when it comes to the staff. I certainly hope it isn't. But what it means is you still reserve the right to then have an official visit where they would pay for it. So you think about it.
And those are limited, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the official visits are limited. Yeah. The unofficials are not. Yeah. So the interesting thing here is Tamara Parker is from Central High School in Phoenix City, Alabama. That's the same high school as AJ Harris. So, you think about Florida, Harris is the 23rd ranked quarterback or cornerback, and then Parker, the 71st ranked defensive lineman, 6'4", 255. So he's more outside, right? He's not the inside guy like we were talking about with talking about earlier. But again, defensive end, they're going to have to replace guys like Brenton Cox. They're going to eventually, not in the not too distant future, have to replace guys like Human Meelan and Powell. Right. And so they're going to need depth there. Parker's a big part of that. And if you can sort of package that, I mean, it's I'm not saying that Harris and Parker are any sort of package deal or anything like that, but it can't hurt, right, to have one in the ear of the other. If in fact you're able to, like, if Parker turns out to be a strong Gator commit, does that impact the decision that Harris makes having a friend on campus? And those sorts of things are things you have to take into consideration. One of the things that we think about when, Kamari Wilson signed last year from IMG, well, hey, not only does that mean that Napier was able to find his way into IMG, but the question is, does he then become an asset for recruiting as people ask him about what goes on at Florida and Napier and all those sorts of things? And certainly we hope so. It's not definitive that he does, but we hope so. And so, hopefully the same thing happens here when it comes to Parker and Harris.
Well, that's all we got for you this week on Stand Up and Holler. Will, you want to give the folks one more time where they can find the magazine?
Absolutely. You can go over to readandreaction.com/mag. That's readandreaction.com/MAG. Again, we hope you appreciate it. We'd love to hear what you think about it. And we really, really appreciate everybody supporting us. We set a goal of number of magazines we wanted to sell. We have exceeded that goal. That doesn't mean we haven't set a new goal, but we're thrilled with the reception. We really, really appreciate everybody's support. It means a lot to us because this is something where you're taking a step out. The YouTube stuff is free. The website at Read and Reaction is free. This is the first time we've asked people to pay for something. And the fact that everybody has done it and done it so willingly and with so much praise has been really humbling. So just really appreciate the support. And again, if you haven't had an opportunity yet, you're going out for summer vacation, you want something to read on your tablet or on your phone while you're out there and want to learn more about the Gators, it's readandreaction.com/MAG.
It's June. We're under 100 days to kickoff, Will. Getting closer. Football's getting closer. Love it. Hope everybody has a great week. We'll see you all next week. Go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.